All right, we're now joined by multi-instrumentalist, guitarist, pianist, keyboardist, drummer, bass player, songwriter, and singer of his own songs. Please welcome Robin Taylor Zander, aka RTZ.
What an introduction.
Well, thank you so much. Please take a bow. I wish I had a trophy to hand you right now, man. It's amazing. Like I say, I go all the way back to the beginning of near the beginning of your Pops group. I know there was probably a couple years in Rockford before they made that first record, so I can't claim that. I was living in Ohio at the time, and then graduated high school in Panama, Central America in '76, and then moved up to the Vancouver market. So
World traveler.
Yes, I love it to this day. The experiences, and I know you know, you probably didn't know at the time how lucky you were to be able to gain all these experiences and travel and see different cultures and kind of experience, what most people don't get a chance to do.
Yeah, well, I've done a lot of traveling since I was a kid for sure. My dad, I don't know how many millions of miles he's logged on American and Delta over the years, but I'm getting up there as well. I've just seen a lot of things that a lot of people aren't able to see. When I'm on tour, I with Cheap Trick, anyways, you get to see a lot of places, but it's for like a small moment of time.
Yeah.
I'm like today I'm here in Saskatoon, but I'm here for a day and a half, and then you know what I mean. I do a gig, and then I go into a bus, and we're on to the next city. So like for this tour, anyways, I get to see a lot, but it's little fragments, and it's a weird life. I get paid to travel. Really, I get paid to travel, not to play music.
It's the gypsy lifestyle, the road dogs. That's for sure. Well, you said you had a couple days off in. Couple days off.
My crew's saying hi to me.
Okay. That must be a great place to have a couple of days off in British Columbia, and to be able to go see the ocean. And I mean, that's what I love about Vancouver. You can stand on the beach and then look the other way and see snow-capped mountains all in one shot.
Oh yeah. I mean, you get to see a lot of things up in Vancouver. We were kind of walking around in amazement of how beautiful it is. It was perfect weather too. I mean, it couldn't have been any better.
Wow. Yeah, that brings me back. Great West Coast city from Vancouver to San Diego, everything in between. So now we are celebrating The Distance, the amazing debut album. I know you've done songs and this and that, and of course there's an acoustic version out there. But talk about when you decided it's time for me to lay down and put out a full album and let people know, that I got my own music, my own voice, and, you start that process of building your own legacy.
Well, the songs were like just waiting to be released. The ones that you hear on The Distance, those are like, I wouldn't say old songs, but they are older, and they've been kind of just, they needed to be released, or else I was going to give up on them and release newer songs that I'm writing currently. But they were born. I did all the recording before the pandemic, and then the pandemic kind of delayed the release a little bit of it. So we started working on it in the winter right before COVID. And we finished it right when COVID was starting, and I had to fly back home. And then a couple months later, we did overdubs. But in total, we did not even like 3 weeks of like, basic tracks, and we finished them all for all 12 tracks in 3 weeks. And then we did the same thing with overdubs. And so it took about 5 or 6 weeks to finish the record. But yeah, I did it all up in upstate New York with my dad's friend, Kenny Siegel. And he was the engineer, and I was the guy hopping around from instrument to instrument, overdubbing all the parts. And then we did vocals last. And the record sounds amazing. I didn't really expect it to happen, so it was a happy accident. all around. And then yeah, I got signed because Jack Douglas heard some of the demos and really liked what we did up in upstate New York. And he offered to mix and master the record with Jay Messina. So they did that, and then it started to sound even better.
Of
And
course.
once it was mixed and mastered, we decided to put it out, and we put it out at the end of April, beginning of May. And yeah, we have acoustic versions of the 3 singles that are coming out the next 3 months. We have High and Low, which just came out end of July, and then we're going to release a song called All Our Trouble, and then we're going to release I think it's an acoustic version of The Distance, and we'll do after that. We're going to be doing some gigs. I'll be playing acoustically. Soon we'll be announcing some gigs I'm opening up for Cheap Trick, which is nice. So everything that's happened after the record has been great. It's great reviews, and everyone seems to enjoy it, which is nice. I'm not trying to be a millionaire off my music. I kind of just want to, excite some people and send some stuff out that they might not have heard.
Yeah, rewards are just a byproduct of great music and connecting with an audience. So money's never the initial goal. But my favorite songs are definitely High and Low, the title track, The Distance, Eyes on the Prize, and What Am I to Do? Those are my favorite. And I love them all, but those really stood out to me and deserved, repeat listens.
Yeah, well, I agree with your assessment there. Those are probably my 4 favorites. 3 of those 4 are singles, so it's pretty accurate. I like the Britishness of What Am I to Do, and kind of the kind of slow intro of The Distance, but then it picks up at the end and becomes this big kind of, it's just like this big wall of sound, which is kind of nice. And Eyes on the Prize, that's an older one too. I wrote that before I moved to Nashville. I must have been 21 or 22 when I wrote that song, and I just turned 30. So that one's pretty classic, but I love that one too. They all have special places.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, let's do a little name association, because I'm hearing some influences in the music, and I'll throw out an artist name, and you tell me what that artist means to you or what you've learned from them and all of that. And of course, we're with RTZ. The first one we got to mention, of course, is the Beatles. What do the Beatles mean to you, and how have they influenced your music?
Well, without the Beatles, there'd be no Cheap Trick, or if there was no Ed Sullivan, my dad might not have gotten into music the way he did, So the Beatles is like everything, to me. The Beatles started so much and influenced so many people. My father was 11 when they were on the Ed Sullivan Show, and he remembers watching it. He was one of those kids around that time, that special time where you're old enough to know you might know what you want to do, but you're young enough to still explore your options. So my dad started getting into the Rolling Stones after that, and the Who, and he started getting the bands. So like the Beatles to me started everything, and for songwriting.
Yeah, they changed the world. I mean, can you imagine how many
Yeah,
garage bands were started the next day after the Ed Sullivan Show?
I can't. I imagine hundreds of thousands, and still to this
Hundreds of
day, a lot of
thousands,
people,
probably. I
a
think
lot of
every
people
male saw
are,
those screaming girls. Yeah,
yeah,
they're like, here, you play drums, I'll play guitar. We'll get Billy here, on a bass. And back then, you could
yeah,
buy cheap guitars and drums at the equivalent of what would be like a Target or a
you could,
Walmart or
yeah,
a
Sears
Kmart.
catalog,
Yeah, Sears catalog, or they had Woolworths and
yeah.
Kresge's and all these department or these discount stores, and you could buy
Yeah.
a guitar for like $20-$30.
Well, yeah. I mean, the Beatles kind of opened up everyone's imagination, into what they could do with a band. I mean, you could make rock and roll popular. Before that, rock and roll was like skiffle. to be honest. And then there's a few rock bands that kind of made it into more of a popular form of music, and they were one of them, and they did it so well. But the songwriting, I think, even more so, is what they influenced me the most with, is just the songs that they wrote, between the four of them, especially Lennon and McCartney.
Yeah, I mean, you look at
But
that
I also,
catalog and you realize they
yeah,
wrote like 100+ classic songs in like 6 years, 6 to 7 years. That entire catalog was written.
yeah, and even to their, like, estimation, like they had more that they wrote that they just didn't do anything with. But, like, you know, if most of your catalog is really good songs, and you've written over 150, 200 songs, I mean, that is pretty good. I would say that most of my songs, I it's hard for me to listen to now, but with them, all their songs are easy to listen to. It's like they're I would never be embarrassed, by a song like Please Please Me, or 8 Days a Week, or Ticket to Ride, even though those are kind of earlier, you know, in their career. They're such great songs, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, of course.
Um,
I was at the famous Hollywood Bowl Sergeant Pepper show with Cheap Trick,
oh
and
yeah,
of course,
that's pretty cool.
yeah, pulling out all the special guests. I remember at the end
Yeah.
of the show, I'm down to stage right, and bam, there's the band. There's Pops and Rick and everybody getting in the van to get the hell out of there. But what a show! Just celebrating the Beatles with Cheap Trick and all those special guest vocalists they had. What an incredible night to be held right there at a facility where the Beatles famously played back in the 60s.
I was there. Yeah, I was a little kid. I remember being there, and that was amazing. It was really cool to watch that happen. I think we were able to watch from the front of the house, which is nice. Um, I didn't have to. Most of the time when we're on tour, I have to watch from the side of the stage. You don't get the PA in full effect, but they had I'm pretty sure Jeff Emmerich, who engineered the original
Yeah.
record. They had him doing live sound whenever they did those Sergeant Pepper gigs. So
Wow.
that was pretty special, just to have him around. One time my dad invited Jeff to have lunch with him and my mom and me and my sister, because they're doing one of those Sergeant Pepper shows. And I was like, I didn't even know who I was meeting. I was such a young kid, but I knew I was old enough to know who that guy was. And I was,
Yeah.
even at 12 years old, I was like asking him all these questions about, about Abbey Road Studios, and like, which rooms did you do that, this song in? Like, I was asking those questions when I was 12 or 13, so like I've been obsessed with that band since I was, like, since I can remember. They mean a lot to me.
Yeah. And of course, you and the band did the version of Give Me Some Truth on the latest Cheap Trick album, of course, In Another World. And I know that was a thrill for you, just hearing those songs, some Imagine and Mind Games and all that. And then being able to do a twist. Obviously, famously, Billy Idol and his band Generation X did a version of that, which you've probably heard.
Yes,
So,
I have heard it. Yeah, no, it's really great. I love doing that stuff. The cover versions they did of Give Me Some Truth and Rebel Rebel. They do a Magical Mystery Tour cover, Cheap Trick. They've toured, and they've done Day Tripper live. So they do a lot of Beatles songs. Even now and then, now and again, they'll do like a song from the Sergeant Pepper gigs that you're talking about, like Getting Better, um, or the medley they do at the end. So they like to throw in every now and then at a show a Beatles song.
yeah, well, let's talk about David Bowie, because you mentioned Rebel Rebel, and you guys have covered that. Digging into your dad's record collection growing up around Cheap Trick. What can you say about David Bowie and the influence he's had, and not just musically, but image wise and fashion wise? He just seems like one of a kind that will never be replaced.
Oh, for sure, one of a kind. I don't know if people wish they could be like David Bowie, but they'll never get to it. He was like the ultimate like troubadour. He did what he wanted. He did what he wanted to do artistically, and he did it very well. He was like tapped into like what was going to be popular in the next 5 to 10 years kind of guy. Um, like I just feel like he went from so many different genres and did them all so well. He did the rock and roll stuff, but he did the glam. He did the singer songwriter. He did the psychedelic kind of stuff earlier. He did the um, you know, he did everything. He did the new wave stuff when he was in Berlin. He did Let's Dance in the '80s, which is a total MTV just like pop record, and he did it on purpose. He's like, I'm going to write a pop record, and it's the easiest thing I'm ever going to do. And he ironically got the most famous for doing that, and then he became more of just not just a cult hero, but like a international hero. Um, he means a lot to the band Cheap Trick for sure. I know especially my dad, loves David Bowie. My dad used to do like a acoustic duo before Cheap Trick, and he would play David Bowie songs half the set, and so I know what influence he's had on my dad and his band. But me personally, I got freaked out, at first time I listened to the song Changes when I was a kid. And I had his David Bowie's greatest hits record.
Changes
so
one.
Yeah, exactly. So I listened to all the hits, and then I started listening to the records, so I kind of went backwards from the greatest hits with him when I was a kid. But I loved all his music, and especially now as I'm older, I appreciate like records like Low and Station to Station and Young Americans, stuff that I might not have liked when I was a younger kid. I'm just totally into, because I know his background. Like, I've watched all his interviews, which he's a great interviewer, or interviewee, or whatever you call it. But he's just a great guy to listen to because he's such a well-spoken man. He's like, he knows what he's talking about. He can tell you where everything came from, and intellectually he's just like, right there on it. And you have to think he was just like a one of a kind guy.
Yeah, and he was a chameleon. He wasn't afraid to change and take a risk and try something new. Famously, he didn't even let the Spiders from Mars know until they're on stage at Hammersmith Odeon that this is the last show for Ziggy and the Spiders, and they're like,
yeah.
Really? And he was.
I know. I just went to the theaters and saw that a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, it was.
They put it out in theater. They remastered it. They remastered the last performance he ever did in London. Put it out.
He influenced so many artists. Besides Cheap Trick, I mean, even Madonna. You saw her changing and chameleon with the look, and Bowie made that possible. It's like, no, don't stand in one place. Keep it moving. Try different things, and it was an enormous loss when we lost him. But it feels like he's still with us. With all that music and all that imagery, he still seems like a force. In music today.
Yeah, he's still. I mean, I'm still influenced by him, so I'll try to carry the torch, with my songs as best as I can, because he represented the artist in the musician. He was an artist, really, and not necessarily a stage performer. He came from art school, and his main drive wasn't just the music, or it wasn't just rock and roll. It was the art itself. It was like so important to him. So I could only imagine, someone who was dedicated enough, like you said, who wasn't afraid to do what he wanted to do, not what his manager or his, record producer or his record label wanted him to do, maybe, at certain times. And I think that's commendable, and I that's how I'd want to run my business as an artist.
Sure. And what can you say about the Rolling Stones? I know Mick is into his 80s, and Keith Richards looks just unstoppable. Nothing will, stop Keith Richards. He's going to outlive them all. And of course, Charlie Watts, which we've lost recently, and Bill Wyman, and even the original Stones. The Brian Jones and Mick Taylor, and of course now Ron Wood. But the Beatles broke up by 1970, but the Stones are well into the 2020s with no end in sight. What can you say about the enduring, influence and legacy of Mick Jagger and Keith Richards and the Rolling Stones?
Well, the Stones are probably just as big, if not bigger, for influences, for my dad. He's got just as many Stones records as he does Beatles records. So he, he's very influenced with that stuff. And so when I was a kid, I was able to eat up as much of it as possible. Records like Beggar's Banquet and, Let It Bleed. I've those first two records that I ever listened to from them. And, they're the last two that had Brian Jones on them, ironically. But, those records, Jumpin' Jack Flash, Street Fighting Man, those are my favorite songs of theirs. And I started out with that. And, I got into Exile on Main Street when I was a little older. And some of their, other records, it took me a while to get into them because I was so obsessed with the Beatles and even the Who, it's hard for me to concentrate on one band, but the Stones, for the longevity, for sure. Super impressive. And, they still make records. They see themselves as a band, not just a novelty act, which is nice. Even if someone leaves the band, they still are able to, keep it going. And for the love of the music, I mean, people still want to come and see them, so, I mean, that's the only reason you need to do it for is because you have fans, and you feel like you owe it to them to tour. So that's what they do. And they've done a great job for, 60 years now.
60 plus years and still making new music. It's absolutely amazing. Well, Robin, talk about the Who. You mentioned them, and obviously coming out around the same time or just after the Beatles and the Stones, but they just had this combustible energy. Pete Townsend, Roger Daltrey swinging that mic, and Keith Moon and John Entwistle. They had a very special energy and a lot of timeless songs. What can you say about the Who?
They're like maximum R&B. They're like the definition of I think they were punk before punk. They were heavy rock, before heavy rock was a thing, but they're also super melodic. And, they did pretty much the first rock operas ever. They made a record interesting, that had a story to it, and they had a beginning and a middle and an end, like a book, really. And a lot of the records are like that. It tells a story, especially stuff like Quadrophenia. I think the Who are not underrated, but they are, sometimes people just don't mention them. And, their peers of their time mentioned them. People like John Lennon, Paul McCartney mentioned Pete Townsend's name a lot. So obviously they had a lot of respect for him. And, in general, he's just a great songwriter. Still is a great songwriter. Still is a great musician. But when they were at their height, I think the Who were just as potent as the Stones or the Beatles or any of those bands that came out of the 60s.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to see him, with Keith Moon and many shows with John Entwistle, and those original four were just unbelievable. They're like a Mount Rushmore, and they were also different people, different voices, Of course, no one was as crazy as Moon, but it was just amazing. You put them all together on stage, and there was just this explosion.
Yeah, you had four lead players. You had a lead vocalist, you had Pete, the lead guitarist, and then John Entwistle, he played bass, but you know, he didn't play bass like everyone else played bass. You know, he played lead bass. You know, he played a lot more stuff that you know you don't realize he's playing until you break it down. You know, kind of isolate what he's doing. And it's like, holy shit, you know. So you know, he added a lot too, a lot of harmonics to the band. And then you had Keith Moon, who just, you know, every 5 seconds was a fill, you know, like so it just sounded, you know, they were huge sounding. They were aggressive. They had this kind of this meanness to them, but not in a threatening way, just like you know, channeling the music that they were playing. The music they're playing was very just strong songs that they got to play at Pete's that he wrote. Just a great songwriter, you know.
Yeah, and then finally, you know, Jimi Hendrix, because you know he's from Seattle. He had to go to England to really get recognized, but we lost him in the '60s. But again, he's one you still feel his influence. He was so groundbreaking on the guitar and visuals, and a very soft-spoken, quiet guy off stage, but on stage he'd be lighting the guitar on fire and playing behind his back and stuff. What can you say about the influence of Jimi Hendrix?
Well, he was, you know, the best guitarist of his time, you know, arguably of everyone's time, just because of, you know, like you said, he wasn't around for that long, you know. He didn't even make it to 30, you know. The guy was just touching the surface of what he could do with the instrument, and look at what he did with it already, you know. So that tells you everything you need to know, I guess. He influences me for sure. I mean, I try to play chords like Jimi Hendrix. You know, I can't play solos like him, but in songwriting, a lot of the chords that he used are really unique, you know, and just very different. And he was just a very great, he's just a great songwriter as well. A lot of these people are looked at as like players and or they're in great bands or whatever, but he was a great songwriter. Like he wrote, you know, if 6 was 9, that's just a great melody, great song, great groove, great guitar solo, everything. But the song itself, he wrote all those songs, you know, that, you know, Fire and Spanish Castle Magic, and, you know, very progressive songs, you know, for their time. For 67, you know, to be putting out Spanish for 68, Spanish Castle Magic, that's very progressive, you know. So he was on the edge of what you could do with rock and roll and psychedelic music. You know, he was the leader of that. And he would have kept leading it. You know, he would have gotten into other things. He would have done different things in different bands. He had put the band of Gypsies together, you know, after his original. So he was, you know, he wanted to do different kind of music and kind of branch out. And you know, I wish he was stuck around a little longer, because we would have gotten a lot of great output from that guy. You know, he's one of the greatest guitarists, but also a really underrated songwriter. You know, people don't talk about Hendrix as a songwriter, and they should.
Well, those are some amazing recollections from a young but wise gentleman here. He is RobinTaylorZander, aka RTZ. We're celebrating the album The Distance. He's going to be doing some shows with Cheap Trick. Besides playing with him, he's going to be opening for some shows. Please keep checking out the website, RobinTaylorZander.com. More information on new music, new shows coming up. Robin, it's been a real pleasure, man. Thank you so much for blessing us with all your insights, and can't wait to see your own music blossom and the continuation of the mighty Cheap Trick. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks. Anytime. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate your time. And next time you want to do this, let me know. Hopefully I'm not in Saskatoon, and I'm a little closer to where you are.